In this section of 1.4, we're asked to find, given a function in the quadrant, to state the value of the other 5 trig functions. We already have a way of doing this from lesson 1.3 using finding x and y and r. But for 1.4, I'd like to focus on the relationship between the trig functions and their fundamental identities. So let's try to use that method on this problem. So we start with our tangent that we've been given is 15/8. And the direct follow of that one is its inverse, so cotangent of 8/15. And then I need to find, I can either go to secant and cosine or sine and cosecant. I'm going to use the function, the identity for secant to find secant, and then we can find cosine from there. So I have secant squared equals this, so that means secant equals the square root of that. It's plus or minus. Tan squared is 15/8 squared plus 1. And plus or minus square root of 15 squared is 225, 8 squared is 64, and then adding 1, I'm going to change the denominator. So I'll do 64 over 64, and I get plus or minus the square root of, let's see, 225 plus 64 gives me 289, which is plus or minus, square root of 289 is 17, and the square root of 64 is 8. That's as simplified as I can get that fraction. I just need to decide if it's going to be positive or negative. So I look at my quadrant. I'm in quadrant 3. So quadrant 3, thinking about that all students take calculus. Cosine and secant in quadrant 3 are negative. Tangent is the positive. So our secant is going to be did I say positive? Yeah, negative. Okay, sorry, negative 17/8. I can't remember what I said, but negative 17/8. Secant and cosine are negative in quadrant 3. Thinking when x is negative. Okay. And then the cosine follows directly from the secant. It's the inverse, same sign. So now I have those two functions. I have these two from the beginning. And now I need to find the last two, sine and cosecant. Let's use our first Pythagorean identity. So our sine, we can use our cosine that we just found. So sine squared is 1 minus cosine squared, which gives me that sine is plus or minus the square root of 1 minus cosine squared, which is plus or minus square root of cosine squared. We got 8 over 17, so 1 minus that. And 8 squared is 64, 17 squared is 289. The negative goes away, and I'm just going to change that 1 to 289 over 289 so I have a common denominator, so I can do some fraction math in there. And I get 289 minus 64 gives me 225 over 289. And 225 is, square root of 225 is 15. Square root of 289 is 17. And sine, we're in quadrant 3, so sine is going to be negative. So that's my sine, and then my cosecant will be the inverse of that. So there's my last two trig functions. And now I found all 6 using the identities rather than finding the x and y and plugging it in.